Okay, it's Belisi and Lenny talking about one chunk of Unit 16, the chunk about indirect sentences, what the book calls indirect sentences and what we're calling embedded sentences, okay? An embedded sentence, here's the definition, okay, is a sentence inside another sentence, okay? And basically in what only certain kinds of verbs can be the verbs that introduce or that are the framing sentence are the framing verb for an embedded sentence. So it comes down to verbs of seeing, verbs of knowing and thinking, and verbs of perceiving. So it's I see you are happy, I know you are happy, I think you are happy. Okay. Those are the kinds of verbs, and there are several of them in Greek, as there are many in English, that introduce are the framing verbs for embedded sentences. Okay, and in Greek there are three ways of doing embedded sentences, depending on what the actual verb, and I don't mean by one of those classes. It varies from one verb to the next, and they can be in verbs that belong to the same semantic class can have different syntax. So just to lay it out, we put an example of the first type on the green board there. This is a verb, horao, the verb to see, that governs the first kind of embedded sentence, in which the subject of the embedded sentence goes in the accusative case. That's the pronoun se, which is the accusative of su, okay? And the verb of the embedded sentence is a participle, okay? So when you're actually translating sentences like this, you have to be keyed in to the notion of the meaning of the embedded verb, right? Mm-hmm. The way you recognize them. Just as in English, you can tell that it's an embedded sentence because you know that certain verbs introduce them. In Greek, you have to learn the ones that do that, but yeah, you can think about it as you come across them. But it doesn't never always have them, okay? You can just say, I saw Julius Caesar. But you can also say, I saw that Julius Caesar crossed the Rubicon, right? And then you've got a sentence, right? So they can either be simple sentences or they can introduce embedded sentences, right? It depends. It changes from one verb to the next, and you have to kind of learn which ones take which construction. In our book, on page 470 at the bottom, there's a list of the verbs of saying, knowing, thinking, and perceiving that introduce embedded sentences and which construction they take. Okay, it's laid out for you there. It's pretty simple. Okay, when you get down to it, as a reader of Greek, you learn pretty quickly which verbs do which ones, right? Mm-hmm. Is there anything in your head about that you use as a key to remember?
Mostly just in general, the types of verbs that will take any of these constructions, because as long as you at least know those verbs, then you look for it immediately in the text, and then it's easy to spot if you know you're looking for an accusative or participle.
So with any of the verbs, you know to look for one of these constructions, right? Mm-hmm. So that's cool. That's a way of simplifying the process. So you got to be alert for these possibilities once you're in this kind of semantic territory of a verb of knowing, thinking, or perceiving, right? Mm-hmm. All right, so the first one is the construction of which you have, to resume, a subject in the accusative case and a verb that's a participle, okay? And it's verbs of perceiving, like seeing, hearing, and stuff like that generally take learning, understanding. Those kinds of verbs generally take this construction. So what we're looking at in our sample sentences, horo, I am seeing, or I see, the present of the verb horao in the first person singular, the accusative of the personal pronoun. We've given you the unstressed one, horo se, bukalon anta, and you've got that's the present participle of the verb to be in the accusative singular, agreeing with the se, okay, assuming the se is masculine. So I see that you are, and that's the way we do it in English, or I see you are, and bukalos is the word for cowboy in Greek, okay? I see you are a cowboy. Now, here's something interesting that's a variation on this. If it's somebody else that's doing the perceiving, for example, it's you see that you are a cowboy, okay? And the you in both cases is the same, or I see that I am a cowboy. Let's take that example. Horo, here's what you do. When the subject of the verb of saying, knowing, and thinking is the same as the subject of the embedded sentence, you do something different in the cases where you have subject accusative and either the infinitive of the or the participle, and it makes sense. What you do is you can suppress the subject of the embedded sentence, and you keep the participle, if you wish, in the nominative case. So you say horo, no pronoun, bukalos, nominative, okay, on, okay. I don't know if anybody would actually ever say this, but you could say, I see that I am a cowboy, right? So the important thing is that the subject accusative construction only applies if the subject of the verb of saying and the subject of the embedded, or saying, knowing, and thinking, of the framing verb, in other words, is different from the verb of the subject of the embedded sentence, okay? So we're going to see how to do this in the other construction. So let's now shift to the second option. We just did subject, accusative, verb, participle. Now we're going to look at subject, accusative, verb, infinitive, all right? And here we have a verb of thinking. This is a new verb in this lesson. Namidzo means I think. Comes from the notion of nomos, custom, okay? But so it's an interesting development. That means I think or suppose. Originally means to reckon as well, to count, in other words, to count up numbers, okay? Then it means to consider or think. So this means I think that you, se, are, enai, a cowboy, bukalon, okay? Here again, we can look at the alternative when the subject of the verb of thinking, in this case, and the subject of the verb of the embedded sentence are the same. I think that I am a cowboy. You're going to say namidzo, bukalos, enai. Okay, you don't have to express the subject because it's the same. And then the predicate is going to be a predicate nominative because it's really, the subject is the nominative subject of the sentence, right? That's why if we had a subject, okay, it would be in the nominative case because they're the same, okay? All right, does it make some sense? I hope so. Okay, so you have to be careful and watch out for this alternative. Okay, it doesn't happen that often, but it can happen. All right. Now let's look at the last example, which is the example that's most like English. And this is a new verb as well, the verb lego, which is actually a very common verb in Greek. It means to say. So you can have a word that's like English that. It's usually haughty, but you can also use the conjunction hos, which we've seen has other meanings, right? Hos with a subjunctive or the optative introduces a purpose clause.
Yeah.
Hos with participle after it introduces a causal clause, right? Like hoya and hata. But hos with an indicative after it, well, let's talk about that, okay? The standard construction with lego is to use keep the verbs in the form that they had in the original sentence. So our example is lego, haughty, or hos, bukalos esti. I say that he is a cowboy. Okay?
Right.
If the verb, however, is past tense, okay, and the past of lego, let's give you the aorist of it. It's elexa, okay? Elexa, haughty, or hos, okay? Either one of the two. And then you have an option, okay, of changing the verb in the indirect sentence to the optative, okay? You keep the aspect of the verb the same as the original. In other words, what you have to have in mind is the syntax of the direct sentence, okay, in order to figure this out. But since estin is imperfective aspect, it used aa, okay, the present, so-called present optative, or the optative of the imperfective aspect in this case, right? If it were was a cowboy, in which case you couldn't use estin. Okay, I say he was a cowboy. You would say lego hoti bukalos agenata, for example. You use the aorist of ignomai. Then you could use you use the aorist of, you say genoita and the hoti clause. Okay, there is a difference in what these mean, because you can also use with elexa, you can also use estin. You can also keep things the same. And there's a difference in meaning in that when you use the optative, you're not vouching for the truth of what you say. Remember, in English, when you say I said, comma, quotation marks, he is a cowboy, then you're quoting somebody's words literally. But if you say I said that he was a cowboy, you may or may not be literally quoting those words, right? Okay, you may be giving a summary, right? And so that's what the optative implies. You're giving the gist of it, but it may not be actually what was said. Okay? Right. All right. We're going to explore some more of the consequences of this in the next video. Okay, but that's the basics of the way in which you do embedded sentences or indirect statements in Greek.